Australia is changing. I'm here with an Australian who is going to explain why leaving Australia before 2030 is a must. Please, Judd, tell us what has changed in Australia and why do you think it's important to leave the country before 2030?
Thanks, Gerald. I think it's important to obviously have a residency somewhere where you've got the ability to leave Australia. Wages have not kept up with inflation, all right? Each year you fall further behind the eight ball. Taxes in Australia, payroll taxes, at least 30%, so you lose a third of your wage. Groceries, probably the highest that they've been in all the time I can remember. And you come to a place like Paraguay, the groceries are so much cheaper. Beer's cheaper, which is great, yeah. Accommodation is cheaper, and it's a lot more of a relaxed lifestyle, yeah. People seem to have the time in their day to sit down and have a conversation with you, or they're not in a massive rush like they are in Western societies now. It's not in Australia everyone's 24/7. They're really stressed. Yeah, that's one of the biggest things I've picked up here is the Paraguayans don't seem to be too stressed. They're a very laid-back people. I don't see a massively good future for Australia. Well, not compared to what I've been used to before. For those that are a lot younger than me, they probably know no different in Australia. But for those around my age, I'm pretty sure if you've been looking around, you can see what's happening to our country. And you've only got to look overseas. We're not far. We're not that far. We're probably one generation away, from being like a lot of these other countries are now. And that scares me, to be honest. Yeah. But, that's my decision. And people that watch this can take that for what it is. Yeah. And if you've been looking around, I think you'll see the same things that I've seen. It certainly isn't the place that I grew up to love and cherish.
Now, during the past crisis, we talked about this already before, a lot has changed in Australia now, or at least the perception of Australia has changed. And this is not just what you hear from Australians. I think globally, the perception has changed of multiple countries where pre-crisis, it was more of we're living in the best times ever. Whereas after the crisis, so post-crisis, a lot of people aren't as optimistic as they used to be. Now, you've talked about the increasing taxes in Australia, how that's been a big burden. Higher costs, housing prices have skyrocketed, correct? Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? How you feel about the housing market in Australia and how it has changed over the past perhaps 3 to 5 years?
Yes, the change in real estate in where I come from, which is Western Australia, has been quite phenomenal, the pricing. Melbourne and Sydney have been that way for a fair while, but younger people trying to get a foot into the market basically have no chance. And so, I don't know, I don't have the answers for it. Even, your basic real estate for young married couples who are just starting out in life, it's phenomenal, the prices. It's over 10 times their annual income in some circumstances, depending on where you are in Australia. But, to start off in life as a young couple in Australia now is extremely difficult with the price of housing, and rentals, especially in Western Australia, the vacancy rate's less than 1%, and the price for rentals is extremely high. So it's very difficult times for Australians at the moment. People defaulting on their loans and these types of things. And to me, I think the government who's in power at the moment, which I may say I've always voted for, being the Labor Party, they seem to be tone deaf on these issues. And I've always been a big believer that government should help the poorest people in the community, because I think that demonstrates a decent democracy. Older people and the younger people are looked after properly in those countries. Older people in our country, the prices for them to get into care homes and care facilities and stuff like that are phenomenal. But it's certainly not ideal circumstances in Australia with the housing side of things, and I don't see that the government has any answer to it. They've and previous governments have done nothing about it. It is what it is. It's governments worldwide, I suppose, but we're certainly up there with places where it's extremely expensive to live now.
I don't know if this holds true for Australia, but I know it holds true for Western Europe, the US too. People just can't afford to have kids. It's too expensive. Now, you talked about the taxes being an issue, and just the cost of purchasing a home is way out of reach for most people. You did say like 10x the annual income. I don't know if that's like before or after taxes, but still sounds like a staggering amount to me. So it's just becoming harder. Now, someone like you, and we talked about this too, not on video, but you pointed out how you would want to be in a place that's more conducive to having a good lifestyle. Whereas in Australia, it's more like, being part of the rat race, so to speak, not fully living your life, not living life on your own terms and not getting too much out of it. Another problem I'm seeing is that countries are raising the retirement age consistently, which makes sense because when you raise the retirement age, you have to pay them less in social welfare, which is good. And it seems like governments want us to work until we die, so they don't have to pay us any more money. It's a good problem they're trying to eliminate, but it's probably not how the senior population should be treated. Now, you also talked about the possibility of going to Asia, living there. I know you have now applied for, or are about to apply for residency in Paraguay. What's your take on living in Asia? And do you think this is a good alternative for Australians looking to lower their living costs and increase their quality of life over time? What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Southeast Asia is a great option for anyone in Australia that's looking to escape the rat race in Australia. Obviously, you've got countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, and people will decide for themselves what suits them. But, I would say to people, get out there and have a look, and, go get on the ground first, see what you think of those countries, and if you're looking at staying in those countries, Vietnam you can't get a retirement visa, but Thailand you can, Philippines you can. The processes they're not that involved once you look into it, in those two countries anyway. There's a few boxes you've got to tick off, but if you go through it slowly and methodically and invest your time with trustworthy people, then you should be okay. But it's a great lifestyle. Southeast Asia's a lot cheaper. Well, so is Paraguay, much cheaper than things in Australia. And you just get to live your life in a manner that's not stressed. And it's your life. You live your best life. So I would say to anyone that's thinking about it, don't think about it anymore. Get on a plane, get out and have a look. We don't know when the next big health crisis is going to come along, and they'll probably lock you inside your country.
We talked about this before, how like the next crisis, potentially a future crisis, could lead to, for instance, now we're seeing with central bank digital currencies. I don't know to what extent they will be implemented in Australia, but it's very much in the cards that your leadership could say, hey Judd, okay, you can live outside Australia, we don't mind. But we're going to limit the amount of money that you can spend outside because we don't want all that money to go to waste. We want all the money to be put to use within our territory, or some of it. Now, how far this is in the future, I don't know, or to what degree this would or could be implemented, I don't know. I think this is in the cards, and we'll see what the future holds. I definitely agree with you on Southeast Asia, Paraguay being much cheaper options to Australians who are about to reach retirement age, like in your case. And another point that we haven't even talked about yet, which is even more interesting, is the dating scene. And, like privately, we talked about how dating has become more of a burden than a joy in the Western Hemisphere. If you can elaborate a little bit about the experience you had dating in Australia and how you see more of a future being outside the country while still getting the best.
Yeah, absolutely. So Southeast Asia and Paraguay, in my terms, I've found women to be a lot more feminine, whereas in Australia I think they're to a certain degree, not all, and this doesn't cover 100% of women, but a lot of the ones that I've come across, femininity is not a trait that they hold dear anymore. That's just my opinion. Whereas in Southeast Asia and Paraguay, when you meet the local women, they are a lot more feminine than what I've been used to in Australia. And a guy my age in Australia becomes somewhat invisible in the dating pool.
It's sad but true. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. But whereas in Southeast Asia and Paraguay, you're something more of a of more value, and possibly a bit of an anomaly. but you have a lot more traction than sitting in Australia and swiping on dating sites and not having anyone return any of your messages.
I now want to add something here about Asia being a society where elderly people are more appreciated. And we all get old eventually, right? So this is a 35-year-old guy talking, and like 10 years later, I'm going to be 10 years older. I can't change that. You can't change anything that, in 5 years, things will be different. So I think that being in a society where people are just more accustomed to taking care of their inner circle, their family. And that's particularly true in Asian culture, where the family is everything, and if you're in a relationship with an Asian woman, you know what I mean by that, because the family is everything for them. And it still is, even when they're in a relationship with someone, whereas in the West, it's like the family does not exist. It's not important. Like, they don't put any importance to how family is treated. It's like the individual happiness is above everything. Whereas in emerging countries, it's the exact opposite, the polar opposite. And I think from what you described, or at least that's how I understood it, it's important to have a little bit of that aspect in your life, something that's been missing for a long time for you back home. Whereas in Asian culture, even when the people don't know you, they still appreciate you more because they have time for that. They make time, right? You value the things that you make time for, I think. And it's like a scale from 0 to 100. Like, everything and anything is in life. And I feel like there is a bit of a hole in our heart that's not being fulfilled in the West. And this is not just about dating women. This is also about like everyday things, just going out and feeling respected, for instance, or feeling treated well. Just all these things, right? In my opinion, in my experience, they are much more present here than in the US. In the US, you don't count unless you spend money with a company, right? And the relationship would only last for as long as you do business with them, Whereas in emerging countries, there's just a general awareness to treat elderly people better, do you know what I mean? Which was also the case, I'm sure, in Australia 30, 50 years ago. So we have to make sure that this doesn't change in emerging countries as it did in Western countries, or we moved for nothing.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts?
Final thoughts, consumerism, I suppose. That, in the Western democracies, that seems to be the be-all and end-all. And, I don't really play into that part of life. I think there's more to life than that. And rather than being a slave to the machine and the consumerism, I chose to go down a different path, and live my life beyond all that in different parts of the world at different times of the year.
Which you pointed out about consumerism being a problem. Now, this almost sounds unbelievable because when people hear the word consumerism, they typically think it's just the US. But you're telling me it's pretty much the same in Australia too. And consumerism is just yourself, right? I don't see that as being a problem here. Obviously, people want to consume to be happy, right? Spending money makes people happy. I'm debating this point. But in the West, people take it to an unhealthy extreme where consumerism is everything, Unless you go out, spend money on things, you're nothing, pretty much, right? Or you're not accepted in society, which is not healthy, I guess. So I do agree with the points that you mentioned, and they're also my reasons for spending less time in developed countries and more time in developing countries. I think once you have moved to the other side, because in my opinion, there are only now two sides where you can live. There's very little in between. And once you've lived in a place like Paraguay or Southeast Asia, it's very hard to go back to Australia and be happy, in your case. Or for me, I immigrated to America, and for me, I like living in Texas, but I can never compare the quality of life to what I have here in Paraguay or what I had in Asia. It's uncomparable. It's just not there, right? Even though I'm appreciative for the things that I have, it's not my ultimate calling, and it doesn't make me as happy. So the question is, how long can you keep going with this and not let it affect your happiness, because your happiness is everything. So what's your take, or what's like your final recommendation for Australians watching this video who might consider moving abroad, but they're a little bit unsure about it being the right decision for a number of reasons? Moving abroad is not easy, and what it's like being in a new culture where your native language is not spoken or not as widely spoken as in Australia. So if you can maybe give our audience a tip or two.
The first thing I would say to anyone that's thinking about coming to Southeast Asia or Paraguay is you've got Google Translate. Just do it. Get on a plane, get over here. The people are lovely. You know, all the scams and stuff you hear about on YouTube, don't let that worry you. You know, most people, you know, scammers are certainly in the minority, in my experience anyway. And if you've got a level head on your shoulders and you're sensible, you know, you're not out walking streets at 3 o'clock in the morning drunk and all that kind of things in the wrong areas, no matter where you are, you know, being Southeast Asia or Paraguay, then you're going to be all right. Yeah. You know, so what if someone overcharges you for an Uber or something like that? You know, big deal. Once they've done it once, they won't do it to you again. Yeah, you'll learn. And that's the biggest thing about coming to another country is, you know, get over your anxieties, get outside, talk to people, try and catch up with expat communities as much as you can early, make friends, get out to some bars, some pool halls, all that type of thing, because it's so cheap compared to Australia. I see a lot of people in Australia that very rarely go out now. You know, most people stay at home because it's too expensive. You know, for a pint of beer, you know, you're talking 15 Australian dollars. And so, you know, that's pretty expensive, whereas, you know, over here it can be a lot less than that. You know, the food's much cheaper, but if you have any anxieties, all I would say to you is do your best to put them aside. Yeah. If you're looking at getting a temporary residency somewhere, contact Gerald with Nomad Elite. Him and the lady that works for him, Jessica, have been an absolute standing help to me since I first landed. They collected me. Jessica took me to where I was staying and helped with my Airbnb because the attendant there didn't speak any English and I obviously don't speak any Spanish, and so she helped negotiate, let's say, my way into my Airbnb because the details that I was provided probably weren't top of the rung, but I couldn't thank her enough, and I can't thank Gerald enough as well. It's been awesome. Do your due diligence, do your homework, but absolutely put your anxieties aside and get on a plane.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. If you're interested in getting residency in one of the countries where we operate, which are, you know, Panama, Mexico, Paraguay, Argentina, or let's say you want to go to Bulgaria, also an interesting low-cost country with low taxes, or as we've talked about Southeast Asia, if you want to go to Vietnam, Malaysia, we can help you get entrepreneur visas for these two countries in Southeast Asia. Please contact us. You should see our website displayed on the screen. There's also a link below this video that you can use to book a consultation with me personally. Well, thank you so much, Jet. I appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy your stay here in Paraguay.
Thank you, Gerald. It's been a pleasure.
And don't forget, it's not too late to leave Australia before 2030. Thank you for watching, and we see you on the next video.